Okay, let's take this from the top. Hey all, my name's Shay, artist, animator, soon-to-be graduate, and I'm here to tell you about my senior project, the Neon Bee. This has been, quite frankly, a long time coming, and I'm honestly glad that I get to share this experience with so many of you. Now, without further ado, let's get started. The Neon Bee began as a faint twinkle in Baby Shay's eye, by which I mean basically at 18 years old in high school, deep in the anime trenches. I still have a Cruel Angel's Thesis playing in my head. I hear the song all the time, and the memes, get in the robot Shinji, I hear it all the time. I can't really give an exact estimate as to what the spark was, but I can say for sure that it started right around the time I looked into modern Black history. I saw all throughout Black history that people like me were freedom fighters, justice seekers, those who stood up to oppression no matter what trials or tribulations they felt in any harsh amount of time. And it was inspiring to me, more so that they strove to have a better world, not just for themselves, but for the people that came after them. And that idea sparked in me a desire to create a character that could do exactly that. It also was right around the time I started getting back into superheroes after not being on them for quite some time. The thing that really lit the spark in me were two shows in particular, Static Shock and Batman Beyond. Static Shock was majorly important as a touchstone and key piece of my personality, as he was the first ever properly Black nerd superhero that I've ever really seen on any screen whatsoever. And Batman Beyond aesthetically was something that I was trying to strive for quite a long time. So seeing those two interact in a crossover really got the gears turning in my head for wanting to make a show that could be one part Static and one part Batman Beyond, and just overall be this amazing piece that could touch so many people and inspire them to do the things that I've always wanted to do with my work. It was an amazing thing for me to experience, and I'm so glad I'm able to give that to so many other people. Finally, the thing that inspired me is a bit of a lesser-known Disney film by the name of Treasure Planet. This is more so aesthetically, but also in the idea of how a found family could come together and make a more cohesive whole than what was originally there. It struck a chord with me because the idea of found family is something that I heavily sympathize with, because if it weren't for the love and connection that I've had from people that weren't actually my family, I don't think I'd be the person that I am today. And the aesthetics of Treasure Planet were something that blew me away, combining deep canvas technology with the backgrounds and 3D animation with Long John Silver's arm and 2D animation with every other character there. It was a phenomenal thing for me to experience, and it inspired me to try and recreate that style in my own personal way. But now's not the time for me to wax nostalgic about the things that inspired me. Now is the time for me to tell you all about my process and how I thoroughly came about designing, idealizing, and ultimately finalizing the world as well as the characters inside the world that is the Neon Bee. Imagine, if you would, a world quite similar to ours, though with a few smaller differences that make this a bit more of a unique setting. Picture, if you would, a semi-utopia, one where the basic needs of many of its inhabitants are met, but there's still a certain underclass of individuals who, through no fault of their own, have been relegated to the outward slums of the wall of Bright Spark City. The city itself is widely segregated into two large sections. In the main part of the city, the inner circle, the bright section of the city, is where you'll find all of the major tech billionaires, the people that worship them, and many who just want to be within their sphere of influence out of any semblance of status among those below them. It's where they reside in these very brightly colored, almost all white utopia looking city, but underneath all of that is just this veil of corruption and horrid treatment of those that are classified as their workers. And in the outer rim of the city, you have Spark City, aka Sparcity, because there's not much there, despite it being a central hub of the industriousness of the human spirit. Just the raw physical capabilities of what people can do when their backs against the wall and how resourceful they can become. The true people that they see as the ones that should be running the city and not the people sitting up in their literal glass houses. This is the overarching conflict of the world of the Neon Bee, the thing that drives each individual person into doing the things that they do, to take the actions that they take, and to preserve the things that they want to preserve. It's the main motivator between every single individual, and a precise motivator for Desmond in particular, which is where the story of the short that I have comes into play. While only a tiny snippet of what is later to come, I do have planned out an entire idea behind a larger teaser rather than just 2 quick shots of what's going to actually be in the teaser. The story of this snippet is pretty much this. Desmond sees a plan in action that he feels it's his responsibility to stop, as at this point he has been the Neon Bee for over a year and a half now and basically knows the inner workings of all of the section of the underworld. He has heard through the grapevine that a deal at this place known as IO Corp, he doesn't know much of what's happening there, but he does know that it is a military contract of some regard, and he knows that when it comes to military contracts, the first thing that these people will want to do is test their effects on civilians, namely using police forces in any way, shape, or form. So he decides that he wants to cut it off at the head, research and potentially sabotage the deal in place before it could become an even bigger problem for not just him, but his entire city later down the line. During this heist, he discovers that the IO Corp is developing military-like drones, things that can peruse streets and potentially take out targets if they are deemed to be a threat in any capacity, especially if that capacity includes their bottom line. As he gets to the building and discovers this, he realizes that in the midst of a shutdown, he accidentally activates a switch. He runs for his life, going through corridor after corridor, staircase after staircase, dodging every which way he possibly can until he finally makes it to the roof and his final escape plan for what he plans on doing. Unfortunately, he runs afoul of the person in charge of security in this instance, Detective Haki Rangi. And at this point is where I feel it is my responsibility to talk about the characters of the show. But not just the characters, also how I develop these characters, their looks, their personalities, and everything in between, so that I can properly show off all that I have done in the past few years of me developing these stories. First things first is addressing the characters, and where to start off better than talking about the main character himself, Desmond Des Rangi. Desmond is pretty obviously, if you've seen what I look like, a self-insert character. He's typically more so in line with what I classify as my own personality, with a couple of twists that make him a bit more different. For instance, he's much more outgoing, he's much more laid back in his overall demeanor, he's a lot more naive than people believe him to be despite having an immense amount of knowledge. He is very much an idealist, and he's also very much someone who tries to see the good in everybody unless that trust is broken for the final time, in which case he will give up on you in a heartbeat. Secondly is his alter ego, the Neon Bee. While very much similar to Dez in many respects, he's also a bit cockier. He's a bit more forward when it comes to insults and things of that nature. He uses a lot of diversionary tactics and such in order to make sure that he always has the upper hand in some capacity. He throws people off their game. He makes himself much more of a direct target by taunting them and then dodging in the last second, all because he's trying to redirect their energy and make them waste their time as he's just getting to his real objective. That's pretty much Dez's entire plan when it comes to doing any real type of damage against any level of the corporate elite whenever he does his whole thief thing. Lastly is Dez's older brother, Haki Rangi. He's a detective, very stoic, very serious, very much no-nonsense type of individual who is not always by the book, but is very much in the mindset very similar to Dez of doing what needs to be done no matter the stakes. He and his brother typically have a more silent but respectful relationship between each other. They very much love each other, but if anyone were to see them from the outside, you wouldn't be able to tell. It very much kind of mirrors the relationship that I have with my older brother, where me and him could be in the same room for hours and not say a word to each other, but we still have a very strong brotherly bond between the two of us that couldn't be replicated even if you wanted to. It's a very unusual relationship, to say the least, but to anyone on the outside, you would think that, oh no, these two very obviously don't like each other, but between the two of us, it's very, very much noted that we love each other very, very much, so it would make the most amount of sense for me to replicate that very, I would say, odd relationship between Des and his brother in order to make sure that there's a more natural feeling to it because it's coming from a place that I know very, very well. Next thing to bring up is the fact that the environments were something else that I really wanted to hammer down as much as physically possible. I spent a lot of time researching different cyberpunk aesthetics for two very different environments that it would take this entire time in order for me to properly list all the references that I had for it. For Bright City, I spent a good amount of time looking up very sleek, almost Apple-like environments in order for me to properly portray that type of world and also do it in a way that makes tons and tons of sense for things to have progressed that way. For Spark City, aka Spar City, I wanted to spend a metric ton of time just properly looking at places that look like cyberpunky but also very much slum-like. So I spent a lot of time looking at Cyberpunk 2077, playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, just making sure to get all of those aesthetics that make this place look as dingy and rundown as possible, but also look like people actually live there and actually built this world out of what is essentially the scraps from people at the upper part of the world. I also need to add here that in order for me to properly get what I needed to get done in the short that I did, I had to work very fast, and considering I didn't really have a lot of time or really the wherewithal to get backgrounds that look as detailed as possible, I spent a metric ton, I want to say like pretty much the entirety of this program, learning how to use Blender in order to really render out and at least get a rough estimation of the section that I was animating in 3D space. And it was really a godsend because it also made me realize that I could properly recreate the feeling of 2D characters in 3D environments. It was just a phenomenal thing for me to finally let click, and this is something that I plan on going forward with more and more. I still have a long way to go. I still have the process of actually making the 3D environments themselves look more in line with the style of the show that I have, so that's going to be developing along with me in this, but it was still a phenomenal thing for me to just click inside my head and finally get down as much as possible. Before this entire program, only touched Blender maybe 2 or 3 times, and those were about an hour each time, and really I barely got past the donut tutorial, for those who know what that is. It was really, really great for me to finally go back to it and just dig deep into doing what I wanted to do when it came to this. I even learned how to briefly 3D model a head for this in order for me to be able to get Dez's head right at certain angles, specifically when I was trying to do a turnaround for him. The final bit of process work is the promotional work. Now this was difficult in more ways than one, as it was the thing I honestly believe I spent the second most amount of time on in general. Coming up with the logo, coming up with posters, coming up with just content that I could just share to get the word out. It was honestly more nerve-wracking for me than anything else because I'm not good when it comes to marketing myself or anything that I work on. I've gotten much better at it, and I believe the format that I'm doing now would be a great way to do it, just little dev diaries about things, but let's not get off topic here. Promotional work was honestly the most amount of fun I've had doing this because it really let me dig into the roots of like the type of person I am. I'm a graffiti artist by trade and by practice, so making a logo that felt more in line with those roots of mine really hammered home exactly how much I really loved doing what I was doing. Granted, I did have a bunch of notes and directions to be pushed into. Shout out to Professor Sandy and many other people who have commented on all of the logo design stuff that I've done before. It really helped push me in a direction that I felt was much more natural and much more appropriate to what I wanted to present my work as. Poster wise, I have had so many ideas that I've honestly had to throw away a couple ideas for posters that really wouldn't have been able to make it or would have been too complicated to have done as of right now. I still plan on finishing them in the future, but right now just shelving them. First poster that I have is pretty much just one that I had a concept for, which is a poster that's kind of holographic, where depending on the angle the light hits it, it will either be an all-white poster that only has Dez as the only colored individual there, and in any other type of light, it'll show the entire city that he's in be surrounded in all white, and surrounded in color, and the actual building that's his goal is going to be in the distance, and that's the only bright white thing. So just having two pieces of art that are contrasting in and of themselves would be something that I was looking forward to potentially trying to figure out. The other one is just, your standard superhero poster things that I was thinking of. And the logo, finally, that I put together was also thanks to Miss Sandy and her notes on how to properly color the logo, because it helped me incorporate all of the main colors of the character that I was working on. Basically, every professor that I've so much as presented this idea to has had an amazing impact on me. Professor Brasco and his multiple contributions to the ideas that I was going for, Professor Hariso and his many ideas on really just how to properly animate certain things, and honestly, I thank every single person that has ever touched this idea for me, because I've absorbed so much knowledge from each person individually. Okay, now with all the mushy stuff done and over with, I now believe it's time for me to present the conclusion of my findings. I do have a bit of storyboards here, and a rough version of the pencil test, and a final-ish version of the pencil test here, so that it can properly display all that I've worked on up to this point. And before I get to that, I just want to say to every person that has touched this project throughout the years, especially throughout this recent year, I want to thank you so much. It's been such a blessing and an honor to be able to communicate this idea with you, to have so many people look at it, to get so much encouragement from people who have, honestly, I never would have been able to meet if it weren't for me being here, and I'm just so thankful that I've met all of you. So from me personally to all of you, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you and a heartfelt appreciation for all that you've done for me. Alright, now without further ado, my finishing piece.